music can have a pretty big effect on your brainwave data. It can affect your mood, how you feel. So I was really interested in creating pieces of art that show how music can affect your mood and emotions over time. So what I did is I collected brainwave data from people using a device like this, which is called a crown, that measures the electrical field coming off your head, along with other sensor data like GSR, galvanic skin response, that basically measures how conductive your skin is, and lastly, heart rate data from something like an Apple Watch. And then combine all three of these to get a good understanding of what your emotions are over time, and then create this visual piece of art that shows how you're feeling in a given moment. So I started creating these pieces of art based on individual songs, so you can see how a song as a whole affects a person's emotion over time. So now we're going to create the actual art. So I have this headset on to measure my EEG data, basically my brainwave data. This one's called the Neurosity Crown. I have these two electrodes on my finger to measure how conductive my skin is, and then my Apple Watch for heart rate data. So now we're going to choose the song. I'm going to choose Never Gonna Give You Up. Set the subject. Choose this so we know where to get our skin conductive data from. This shows that we're connected to the crown, and we can check how good the signal quality is, and it's good enough for us to continue. So now we're going to start recording.
A few minutes later.
So we just collected all the data, and now I can go into my database, go under my name, and we can see the song that we recorded here, Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. And we can see that my software created this blueprint. And this blueprint basically tells us how to construct a piece of art. And this is all based on the biometric data that we just collected. So now I can go into Blender, and I've already put in the subject name and the song name, and then you can just run the script. So now it's loading, and we have the art. This is probably one of the most colorful ones I've seen. There's like so many pastel colors. So basically the way the art is generated is that each one of these nodes represents one particular moment in time. So this would be the beginning of the song, this node right here. And then as time progresses, we go downwards in the arc like this. And then once it's done there, it starts at the top again and then goes in a circle. So basically, this is like a timeline of your emotions during the song. And the distance of each one of these nodes from the center of the sphere represents how stimulated I was. So that's what we were measuring using the skin conductance. So in the beginning of the song, it wasn't as stimulating versus towards the end of the song. This part right here is the end of the song. And we can see that it's like pretty consistent, but gradually increases over time. And then for each node, the RGB value is based on 3 levels of emotion: focus, calmness, and sleepiness. So red is correlated to how focused you are, green is based on how sleepy you are, and blue is based on how calm you are. So when you combine those 3 values, you get a unique color showing the combination of the 3. And the last thing about the art is that the size of each one of these nodes represents how high your heart rate was. So we can see that my heart rate was pretty consistent throughout the song, so there isn't really much I can show about the variety in it. Lastly, you can see that each one of these nodes has a different shape, like a different pattern. You can go here. Yeah, they all have different patterns, different shapes, and while there's some randomness to it, it's actually an encryption of the brainwave data in that moment in time. Here's an example of like a smaller node versus a bigger node. This one's like smaller versus we have some bigger ones over, well, everywhere else. But yeah, the noise pattern is based on the encryption of your brainwave data. So this is actually, like, if there was a way to decrypt the encryption function I used, which there isn't, because it's a one-way encryption function, you could theoretically take this pattern and decrypt your raw brainwave data. But yeah, as of now, there's no way to decrypt it unless we have quantum computers, so this data is completely safe. But yeah, it's a lot of colors, and it looks pretty nice. So now I'm going to dive into the science behind how all this emotional data was calculated. So the colors were controlled by 3 metrics: your focus, calmness, and sleepiness. And that was controlled based on the frequency of your brainwaves. So the frequency of your brainwaves tells us a lot about the emotional and mental state that you're in. Generally speaking, higher frequencies relate to using your brain more, which is like pretty intuitive. So like thinking, focus, versus slower brainwaves, so lower frequencies, are associated with things like sleepiness and calmness. So if you're meditating, that would be like a lower frequency brainwave state, versus if you're focused in intense work, that would be a higher frequency brainwave state. So basically, we just looked at 3 different frequency bands of your brainwave data. So the slowest was sleepiness, towards the middle was calmness, and towards the higher end of higher frequency data was you being more focused. And then the metric of how far those nodes were away from the sphere, how stimulated you were, that was controlled by your galvanic skin response, which is basically how conductive is your skin. Because we may not realize it, but when we're more stimulated, we tend to produce more sweat. Our sweat glands open up. And so there's more sweat, more salt on your skin, and that's pretty conductive, and that'll increase the conductivity of your skin, and we can measure that if we have a good enough sensor. And the last thing was just heart rate from my Apple Watch, which everyone knows how that works. The original idea behind this project was to take the brainwaves from actual music artists and then see what this brainwave art would look like for the artist that created that actual piece of music. So I actually did go and work with some music artists, collected their brainwaves listening to their own music, and created wonderful pieces of art. And I also spoke at various conferences about this. I spoke at a bunch of crypto conferences. This like turned into an NFT project for a while, but you know, NFTs are kind of dying, so it's just back to an art project. Spoke at East Denver at first. I created an NFT of me speaking on stage, collected my brainwaves live on the stage, turned that into a piece of art, and was able to sell that to someone. Also spoke at Block Split 3 in Croatia after, did the same thing. I even let people in the audience come up later and create their own brainwave art pieces from songs that they love. And then the last place I spoke was at NFT NYC in, of course, New York, and did the same thing, recorded all my brainwaves while giving the presentations and turned them into visual pieces of art.